Hi there. So today I'm going to walk you through some of the calculations we're going to ask you to do for the data analysis on Module C. I'm going to start out in the instructions sheet that you're all going to find on Moodle. And here you'll see the link to the spreadsheet that we want you to use for the calculations. Go ahead and open that up. And before you do anything else, you're going to need to make your own copy of this spreadsheet so that you can make edits. So go ahead and go to File, make a copy, and then if you would save it with your last name in there, your last name, keep in mind, that'll help us keep track of whose document is whose as we grade. Now that you have your own copy of the spreadsheet, we'll be able to make calculations on the sheet. So if you go into the column here that says net learning gain, on the net learning gain, the simplest way to do this calculation is to say that the gain will be equal to, and I always start with an equals, their final score, subtract their score on the pre-test. And that's going to let you see how much they improved from the pre-test to the post-test. I thought I got rid of that. So if you get a warning that this is a protected range, I did change that. I'm just going to pretend like we don't need to worry about that for the next 5 minutes. That's something that actually is really handy as a teacher. I've set all of these cells over here to warn you if you're editing them because I don't want you to accidentally change the raw data. Next thing I'm going to show you is something called conditional formatting. So this is just a handy way to use colors to make it really easy to evaluate data. So on this net learning gain, I'm going to go up here and look at format, conditional formatting. And I want it to tell me if this cell is less than, if their net learning gain is less than 0, I'm really worried. So I'm going to make those ones red. And that's going to be like a red flag for me that I need to go check in with that student and figure out what's going on. Then I'm going to set another one and I'm going to say, well, in this case, maybe if it's between 0 and 10. 0 and 10 is kind of a modest learning gain. I'm going to say, let's make that orange. And we're going to add one more rule. And we're going to say, well, if it's greater than 10, then we feel pretty good. Let's go ahead and fill those ones in with green. Hit done. And what you'll see back here is that your data is now color coded. And you can at a glance just be able to see, ooh, concerning, looking good, and then these guys that are kind of in the middle. The next calculation I'm going to work you through is the mean, median, mode, and range for the data. We're going to leave the grade calculations till the end because they're kind of complicated by comparison. Remember, mean is another way to say average, and that is actually how Google Sheets wants you to fill this in. So we're going to use equals, and then we're going to tell the computer to go ahead and calculate the average for us. We want the average of the pre-assessment, so we're going to highlight all of the data from our students, put a parentheses at the end, close off that function, hit enter, and it's automatically going to calculate the average for the pre-assessment. Next is the median. So we're going to go ahead and hit equals, and then if you just start typing in median, it actually has that function built in also. We're going to select the same range of data, all of the pre-assessment scores, close that off. Mode is another function that is built into Google Sheets, and all we have to do is select the data that we want it to find the mode for. It will automatically do those calculations for us. The one here that it doesn't have is it doesn't have range. So in order to find the range, we're going to have to tell the computer to find the maximum value of our data. And then subtract the minimum value for the same data. And then that will calculate the range. 39 is a pretty huge range for a test that only had a maximum score of 50. You've got kids all over the place. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I don't have to scroll up and down quite as much as I'm selecting my data. And then one other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and freeze this top row. That way when I do scroll, I'm still going to be able to see that this is the pre-assessment data. So to do that, I select the whole row by clicking on 1. Go over to View, and you'll have the option to freeze. And in this case, I'm going to go with the horizontal row. And I just want to freeze that top row. That way when I scroll down, I can still see that these calculations are for the pre-assessment. Now we want to do these same calculations, the mean, median, mode, and range, for a whole bunch of different data. We're going to find it for the post-assessment, the learning gains, days absent, tardies, and number of discipline issues. And the fastest and easiest way to do that is to select your formula that you typed in for the pre-assessment. There's a little blue square on the corner. If you click on that and drag it over, it will apply that same calculation to each of these columns. Now we don't need them for the letter grades, it just won't even make sense, so we'll go back and delete that after the fact. But you can do that for each of those calculations. Drag it over, and you will be able to find the mean, median, and mode really quickly, as well as the range. Like I said, for the letter grades, it just doesn't make sense, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to delete those. And all of our calculations for those columns are done now. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to walk through is just this column that's labeled gender, doing a count if function to see how many boys and girls we have in our class. And basically, in this case, what we're going to do is tell the computer that we want it to count if any of these cells here have the letter M in them. Go ahead and close that off. And it tells us there's 13 boys. You could do a simple, 28 students minus 13 is the number of girls. Or I'm going to go ahead and use another count if function. And I'm going to say if any of these cells, in this case, say F. For girls. Oops, missed a quote. Okay, and we get 13 boys and 15 girls. We're going to use the same count if to count up the number of LEPs or ELL students in our class. So in this case, we're going to use count if. And we want to know if any of these cells here say Y. Ooh, I did not grab that appropriately. Any of these cells say Y. There we go. That's what I wanted it to do. And it's telling me we have 8 students who fall in those categories. I'm actually going to use the same exact function for the column on SPED services because we want to count how many yes answers we have in that column. So once again, I'm going to highlight that, click on the little square on the bottom and drag it over. And now that calculation's done also. Okay, I've been working my way towards the more complicated calculations. You might have wondered why I skipped past the one that seems to come first, being the letter grade. And it's because in this case, we want the computer to check for several things. We want it to check if the grade's an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F. And to do that, we have to use an if-then function, actually several of them. I'm going to walk you through it. We're going to start out with if. We want the computer to check and see if. And we want to know if this score is greater than 44. If it's greater than 44, the only possible outcome is that that student earned an A. However, there are multiple possibilities if they got 44 or less. So we need to walk through those one by one. And so we'll have to use another if function. So if they got less than 44, then we want the computer next to check to see if, well, what if this score here is greater than 39? Then they got 40 or more points on the pre-assessment and they would earn a B. We're going to keep on going down the line and say if, well, if this first column were more than 34, greater than 34, then we would want the computer to tell us that that student earned a C. if the first column is, whoops, I'm not done with you. Come back here. Forgot my parentheses. If the first column is greater than 29, then we want the computer to tell us that the student earned a D. And now at this point, the only other possibility is that if they got less than 29, then they must have earned an F. So we'll put that in there. Make sure our parentheses line up. I think I need one more. Now we're all closed. Hit enter. And the computer will automatically calculate the grades for this assignment, and we can drag that down for the rest of the column. Now, since this was kind of a complicated calculation, and we've got a big formula going on up here, when I do the letter grade calculations for the post test, I'm actually just going to copy this formula that we dropped in. I'm going to paste it into column E, but be careful because we don't want it to pull the raw scores from the pre-test. Now we want to pull it from the post-test. So everywhere where it says B2, we need to change that into D2. I don't want the pre-assessment scores. I want the post-assessment scores. So I'm going to replace B2, which was our pre-assessment, with D2. And now it should calculate the scores for the post-assessment. And you can see, yep, we've got A's, F's, everything's lining up appropriately. Okay, now the only remaining calculations on this page are to look at the number of A's, B's, and C's, D's, and F's on the pre and post assessments. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use COUNTIF functions again. So we're going to use a equals COUNTIF. I'm going to select my data. I want to know if any of those cells say A. So that'll tell me how many students earned A's. I'm going to use an equals COUNTIF. I'm going to count and see if any of these cells say B. And we're going to work our way on down. Same function. And look at any C's. D's or F's. And it looks like there's a lot of F's in this. And that's not surprising because it is the pre-assessment. We're not expecting students to have all the prior knowledge that we're going to expect them to have by the end of the unit. It's actually some of these students that are getting A's and B's already and already know the material before we taught it that I'm more concerned about, well, what am I going to do to change the curriculum to make sure that they're still engaged? Okay, now instead of doing the calculations all over again for this column, I'm once again just going to drag these over. I realize that middle column's not going to make any sense. We'll go back and delete that after the fact because that's just garbage data right now. So let's get rid of this. Those numbers don't actually make any sense. And at this point, all the calculations for the classroom data page are done. All you need to do is fill in these lines here that just are a description of what does this data mean to you? And I'd probably pick one column, maybe the pre-assessment or the post-assessment, and talk about, okay, if the mean on the post-assessment is 37.7, what does that mean to me as a classroom teacher? What if my mode was significantly higher or lower than that? What about the fact that the range is 33 on our post-assessment? What does that tell me as the classroom teacher? So make a note of each of those before you are done with this tab on the calculations, and then I'll pick up on the next video for the remaining 2 tabs.